A woman shoved open Enya's door and called, "Enya, wake, there's a bell again." The shout hit the room before the lantern flame found her face. Enya left the wool shawl half-draped and stepped into the lane with her fabric bundle clutched in one hand. Suspicion tightened her chest as she ran toward the bell tower. Villagers were already moving, boots crunching on frost, voices short and urgent. Thomas from the smithy, Collier the boy tugging at his father's sleeve, 3 women rubbing their hands to stay warm. The bell had stopped mid, toll in Enya's dream a dozen times. Now it sounded in the square and the problem was visible and immediate. By the 3rd sentence the central problem was clear. The same nightmare had woken them all, and its images were arriving in hands and pockets. People stood in the square beneath the tower, breath steaming, each carrying an object they had seen in sleep. Enya discovered her palm damp around a strip of cloth she had dreamed of tearing from a doorway. She held it up without thinking. Thomas saw it and went pale. Enya moved through the crowd with precise steps. She knew where the lamplight pooled and where shadows lay thin. Marta stood near the bell tower, scarf wound tight, shoulders steady, and she was already speaking as if she had expected the summons. "Bring what you found, Marta." Her voice did not rise, it steered the panic. Enya heard the rasp in Marta's tone and felt the emotion root. Suspicion, a simmering distrust of whatever was taking their nights. That suspicion pushed Enya forward. She would not leave the question unlooked. Collier held up a small wooden top, its paint worn away. Thomas clutched a length of splintered wood, nails still embedded near one edge. A woman named Ivka had a child's mitten, damp at the cuff. No one could name the war the images suggested or the doorway they all kept seeing, but each person carried a fragment of the same scene into daylight. Conversations began in clipped phrases. "Where did you find that, Collier?" "Enya, by the field fence." "Collier, it was under the moss." His words came fast. His fingers did not stop moving. "Thomas, where did you sleep with that in your hands, Marta?" Thomas' jaw worked. "On the forge floor. I woke sweating and the wood was in my hands. I thought it was work at first." He dropped his tool bag and folded his arms to steady himself. "I scratched names into the shed last night. There are names I don't know." His voice broke on the last sentence. A small knot of villagers edged closer when Marta, "Bring the shed boards. Bring the lintel if you have it. We cannot pretend this is private anymore." The sentence set a plan into motion. The community pivoted from confusion to a deliberate search. The tension climbed. Within minutes, a handful of people had agreed to check places they had avoided for years. Marta gathered the most shaken residents beneath the lamplight and poured tea from a chipped pot. Her hands moved with the slow certainty of someone who had held families together through shortages and storms. "We keep our daylight steady or we lose it," she said. And no one laughed. She framed the problem plainly. Unnamed images at night were eroding their waking memory. She warned that if those images continued to arrive as objects, the village's present life would become a thin thread. Her warning was neither melodramatic nor vague. It named the risk and gave them a course. Thomas sat with his head down and admitted the shed confession again, this time with the board he had pried free laid across his knees. The board had marks. Names in a child's uneven hand and one line of letters Thomas could not read. "I wake and my hands are full of wood," he said. "I wake and the names are on my mind and I cannot tell why." The table fell quiet. Marta slid the rosary from her pocket and ran her thumb along the beads without looking at anyone. Enya listened, watching reactions carefully. She nodded when Thomas spoke. The suspicion that had tightened in her chest earlier shifted into a second feeling. Doubt about whether naming the past would heal or break them. She folded her hands into her lap and traced the edge of her bundle until the fabric pattern matched no particular memory, and yet the touch calmed her. Marta's voice rose then fell as she made a choice. "We will search where the land remembers things it no longer wants to name," she announced, at dawn. "Those who dream must look where dreams point." The decision moved the village from talk to action. They left the kitchen with listless packing, the group small and practical. Enya, Marta, Thomas, Collier. The sky paled toward dawn and steps were noiseless in habit. Enya walked beside Marta, watching the older woman's hands. Marta's fingers found the rosary inside her pocket and tightened around it once. She did not speak much until they reached the hummocked field. Then she pointed at the ground and said, "There. Walk slow where the moss grows high." Dreams like low places. Marta's remark was concrete, not sentimental, and it told Enya what kind of search to begin. At the field edge, dusk left pools of cold and a frost scabbed the grass. Enya stooped and ran her gloved fingers over a hummock. At first she found nothing but moss and damp. She rose, wiped her glove on her skirt, and then her fingers struck wood. The lintel was half buried, its grain dark with rot and smoke. She pulled until the heavy piece loosened enough to free with both shoulders. The wood matched the doorway in her nightmares. The same notch at the top, a charred edge, and a nail bent inward. She held the lintel against her chest and felt her heartbeat sharpen. The discovery changed suspicion into something fierce. Thomas knelt and brushed away loam to reveal a pattern of scratchings on the lintel. He read aloud, stumbling over letters. He called out names. Anna, Miro, Luba, what do these mean? Collier crouched and pointed to a set of initials that matched the scrawl Thomas had found in the shed. The group went quiet. Enya's mouth went dry. The lintel proved that the dreams were keyed to actual objects in the landscape, and not merely to private terror. Marta touched the blackened edge and breathed a single sound. Her shoulders rose and fell. This was cloth and smoke and the bell, she said. Her voice had registered a memory, not a claim, and the sound made the others listen. She added, the rope was cut shorter than the bell should be. Someone tried to still it, an investigation had begun, and every fact pushed the village further from denial. They climbed toward the ruined chapel with the lintel strapped to Thomas' back. The lane narrowed, hedges dead and stripped of leaves. As they reached the chapel gate, Enya felt a second emotion shift, doubt giving way to fear. She kept her hands folded and sensed the village's collective intake. The threshold lay in shadow and half-broken masonry. The doorway matched the lintel perfectly. Soot clung to the lintel's opposite half as if the two had lived together in the same frame. Thomas found a bell rope dangling, cut and frayed. Collier's small hand closed around a coil of thread tangled in the fray. It is the rope from my dream, Collier. The bell doesn't ring right in sleep. Thomas set the lintel in place for them to see the fit. Enya stood with her palm flat on the lintel and felt a dry smear of something that might have been ash or old mortar. Marta's face changed then. She stared as if searching for a word she had refused for decades. The moment at the threshold became the chapter's climax. All resistance thinned and the boundary between waking and dream narrowed until they all had the war tableau at once. They saw men in heavy coats moving in two lines, boots punching into mud. They saw a bell tolling, not with sound but with remembered motion of rope pulling. They saw a doorway that waited with an unspoken demand to be named. Enya's breath shortened. Her fingers tightened against the lintel. Marta's jaw worked and tears came into her eyes silently. Thomas swallowed and Collier put his face into his sleeve. No one spoke immediately. Then Marta made a sound that was not prayer and not song. It was a place, hold a word that steadied her throat. We called it the clearing, she said slowly. But there was a place beyond the clearing. I stopped speaking its name when I stopped being certain it could be said without bringing trouble. The confession bent the scene toward a concrete revelation. Marta had withheld a memory, a deliberate act that shaped the village's forgetting. Enya, why would you stop saying it? Her voice was even. She wanted an answer that would let her act without breaking the present. Marta looked at Enya and then at the lintel, because the last time I said it out loud, men came at dawn. I thought naming might call them back. Her words landed like a tool set put down and left a clear hole for others to fill. Thomas' fingers closed into a fist. Then this is not only a ghost, he said, it is tied to people who were here and something they did. We have both the object and the choice of what to do with it. The confrontation that followed became a short, sharp argument. Back in the village by the communal hearth, voices rose and fell as two camps formed. Some argued for burying the lintel and closing the chapel door, sealing the place away to protect their delicate peace. Others insisted on documenting the site and calling in someone who might read the scratched names. Marta moved between them, rubbing the rosary and keeping her voice low. If we hide this, will it stop the dreams? Ivka demanded, we cannot pretend the lintel will vanish from our hands when it wakes us at night. Thomas answered, then we must take care and not show the children. Said Marta, we name what must be named and keep the rest to ourselves. Her line of reasoning was measured. Disclosure with limits. The exchange included quick back and forth lines that revealed opinion and fear. Marta, how do we protect the children if you will not tell all? Ivka, by teaching them the songs that blot the nights. Marta, by teaching them what bell sounds to answer and what bell not to pull. The debate contained 3 to 6 rapid replies and shifted the group's sense of responsibility from simple avoidance to active guardianship. Enya watched the argument and felt a steadying shift inside her, from suspicion to resolve. She had started the night pulled by doubt. Now she felt the choice of carrier. Her hands had held lintel and cloth, and that tactile knowledge anchored her decisions. She nothing at first, then she set her small fabric bundle on the table and opened it to show a faded photograph and a child's toy wrapped inside. The photograph showed a doorway with a bell tower in the distance. The toy's wood matched Collier's top. A murmur ran through the room. Marta reached for the photograph and turned it in the lamplight. It was a family I remember, she said. Not names, not all of them. But I remember a woman standing by that doorway and a child asleep on her knee when the men came. I told myself to forget, to keep living. The twist shifted how everyone understood Marta. She had actively erased elements of the shared past to protect the living. That act made the problem not merely one of memory failing, but of deliberate silence shaping the present. Thomas struck the table with a palm. You chose for us, he said. His voice had edge. You chose to cover this. You cannot say now that naming will ruin us when the hiding was your decision. The confrontation became personal. Marta's shoulders slackened in a visible, bodily reaction. She reached out and touched Thomas' hand, a small attempt at reconciliation that spoke through contact rather than words. Thomas, Marta softly. I chose because I could not bear the sight of the men when they came. I chose because I could not hold the village together if I kept naming men who took children or fields. I thought silence would stop the harm. Her words were plain. The argument did not resolve that night. It left a decision for the villagers to make. Near midnight, after voices had argued and some had left to sleep in fits, Enya sat alone in her small bedroom with the lintels chip balanced on a shelf. She felt 2 more changes in emotion. A tremor of fear when she realized naming might summon something, and then a steadier, quieter determination. She folded her hands into her lap and held the little photograph again. She decided to accept personal risk, to carry memory gently rather than let secrecy carve the village into nothings. Her choice was concrete. She would visit the threshold in both sleep and waking until she could speak the doorway's name without causing harm. Before she closed her eyes, she knotted her fabric bundle and tucked the child's toy inside. She put on the thin brass ring on her right hand and smoothed the mended apron she had worn earlier, a small ritual to steady herself. Then she rose and opened her window to the mist. Outside, the bell tower stood dark. Enya walked the lane back toward the chapel with measured steps. Marta noticed her leave and came out to stand at the gate and watch. They did not speak more than a sentence, but their silence was not empty. Enya paused at the gate. She placed the lintel fragment back on the grass where she had found it and touched its charred edge. Her decision was not finished with words. It was a set of movements. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and crossed the threshold into the chapel yard. Marta stood in the lane, hands folded on her rosary, and when Enya looked back, Marta lifted a small, slow nod that meant keep this safe. Enya answered with the single motion of lifting her fabric bundle and walking toward the ruined doorway. The last sound before the page closed was the soft scrape of her boots on old stone, and the lintel at her feet gave off a dry, familiar scent of wood and smoke. Outside the window, the bell tower fell silent until morning, and the village waited for what would come next. The plow hit timber with a clear, ringing knock and dust sprayed over the furrow. Enya's suspicion tightened her hands around the fabric bundle as men swore and the plowman cursed. Jacob, what did you strike? Marta called, voice cracking with a mix of warning and curiosity. The crowd parted with boots and skirts and breath. By the 3rd step, Enya knew the threshold she had passed in sleep. The hinge, the nick at the lower plank, the way the light through the gap made a thin vertical line on the packed earth. Suspicion shaped her pace and pushed her forward before she could fully think why. Enya had not slept well the night before. A woman had woken her earlier, shouting about a bell, and the bell had come and gone while the village listened from bedside windows. That memory still sat like a weight in her chest as she crossed the newly turned soil. Marta's shawl fluttered behind her. Luca pushed through, eyes flat, holding his book in one hand as if it were an offering. Thomas lingered at the edge, rubbing a knot on his palm where a spade sometimes bit. People named their tools and places aloud as they moved. Names steadied them. Show us, Jacob simply. He planted his hands on his hips and pushed loose soil with a heel. Jacob lifted, then tell us, Luca. Enya did not wait for permission. She crouched and brushed earth with fingertips that smelled like linen and wood smoke. The board was half buried. A ring of iron showed where a handle had been. She touched the hinge groove with one finger, felt the indentation she'd felt in the dream. Her hand trembled without surrendering to it. Marta came close and lowered her voice to keep the space between them small. Enya, you saw this before. Marta. Her raspy tone carried both caution and a slow tenderness. Yes, Enya, the same hinge. The same splinter at the left side. She held the evidence open with measured words. The villagers argued immediately about what to do. Some wanted to cover the board back with earth. Others wanted to pry it open and search below. Voices rose and fell like measured blows. They pulled a plank from a cart and set it at the lip. Enya felt every footstep around her as if the earth itself held a list. People spoke in short sentences so words would not overreach. We can't leave it here, Thomas. We need to know. If there is something under, it might draw more trouble, said a woman whose name Enya did not know. Marta pressed a knuckle to her lips and said nothing for a long breath. Her silence had weight. At Marta's kitchen later, the group made decisions by passing simple objects. They passed a cup of tea, the tin of mending needles, and a worn butter knife. Marta spread the tea towel on the table and set the photograph there with careful fingers. The photograph slid from Enya's fabric bundle when the flap caught on a nail on the cart. Enya reached for it and froze when she saw the picture face up on the cloth. Her mouth went dry. Enya had not meant to show anyone that photograph. The image was small and browned at the edges. It showed a doorway with a single step and a child holding a wooden horse. The hinge was visible. The child's hair lay in a blunt cut. A name was scratched on the lower beam in faded ink. Enya swallowed. Where did you get this, Marta? Enya tucked a stray hair behind her ear and said, It fell out. I kept it wrapped. I thought. Her voice stopped. She could not finish the thought because she did not want to say she had kept it, because it matched the dream. Luca leaned forward, fingers spread on the table. Luca, Marta, tell them what the teacher says about records. Luca's voice had the slow cadence of someone who read aloud to children. Names matter in what we leave behind, he said. Names tell what we cannot carry otherwise. He traced the faded name with a nail and then lifted his eyes to the group. If the beam lists names, we must read them. A decision formed then. They would go back to the field and lift the door. They worked by shifting weight and by rhythm. Jacob found an iron crowbar and nodded to Thomas. Thomas, brace here. Enya, steady. Marta took the other end and hummed a low melody under her breath while the men pried. The plank yielded with a creak, not a dramatic ripping sound but a slow, practical release. A set of steep, dark stairs showed their worn edges. The light from the sky cut a thin line that slanted down the first step. Enya smelled dust and old wood and something else she could not name. A metal note like the ring of the plow when it had hit the wood. Enya went first. She held her lantern low so the flame would not catch on descending silt. Her foot found the worn groove she'd seen in her dreams. Marta followed and touched the wall as if to find the room's shape with her palm. Luca counted the steps quietly. His voice was methodical. 1, 2, 3, he said. The small group moved as if rehearsed. The space below was low and packed dirt underfoot. They crept with their heads bent. On the floor lay objects left where someone had set them and never returned. A child's wooden horse sat on its side near the far wall. A bell fragment lay a small distance away, its clapper missing. Wooden pegs stuck up from the beam above where a simple shelf once held jars. In a beam across from them the group found tally marks, carved with a blunt tool. The marks were irregular but deliberate. Enya crouched and ran her hand along the scratch of one name and felt the scraped depth under her fingertips. Marta's hand found a carved letter and she pressed her thumb to it, humming the melody she often used to call the children to supper. Marta, someone said. The voice, small and sharp, read them. Marta took the lantern closer. closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them and read out loud. She read names short and formal, each name landing in the air as if on a wooden peg. As she spoke, Enya recognized several surnames she knew from the lane. Petrov, Markov, Ivashko. The list continued. Luka traced a name with his nail that matched someone who lived 2 houses down. Silence folded into the low room. Enya's pulse moved like a bird trapped under a lid. She felt the room tilt not in metaphor, but by way of people shifting closer, the lantern heat on her cheek, the tightness in her jaw. Her suspicion slid into a colder shape. Not only had the village forgotten the war's exact events, but names of neighbors were carved in the place that held those who did not return. That realization changed her steps. Arguments began even before the names were fully read. We should bury it again. Thomas, his voice flat. We can close the door and claim the field is just where old things go. No, Luka, you can't hide what has names. If they are our names, we must bear them. We cannot pretend no one wrote this. Thomas's hands clenched. Would you hang their faces on the green then? He barked. Marta set her palm on Thomas's forearm. Thomas, she said, we will not hang faces. We will decide together how to hold this. Her voice wavered on the last words. The first emotion shift moved people from curiosity to fear. Voices rose into quick, small sentences. Who wrote these? Who fixed the tally marks? Who decided to lock them below? People tossed questions like tools. Enya listened, mouth pressed thin. She watched faces who had laughed at weddings stand slack now. She watched Marta's fingers go white around the rosary in her pocket. Then a discovery shifted the room again. Luka's nail found a second photograph tucked behind a beam, damp at one corner. He handed it to Marta. The photograph showed the same doorway, but in the background someone had written a short notation in a careful hand, a date and a place. Marta read the numbers aloud and then went still. The date is a winter month, 3 years before the harvest we recall. Marta. Luka's mouth made a small O. That means someone named and remembered the event soon after it happened, he said. Thomas's face went red, so they wrote it and hid it, he asked. He jabbed a finger into the beam where the tally marks were deeper. What kind of people would lock their own names down and not tell? Marta's slow patience tightened. Some did tell and then were silenced. Thomas. Some decided the peace of the living mattered more than the truth of what happened here. Her breath left her with a controlled pull. The second emotion shift took suspicion and fear toward moral reckoning. People split into camps, quickly erased the names, some said. They wanted the names removed from the beam and the lid secured. No, others said, let the names stand. We owe that much. The dispute grew in the midday square as loud hands made louder speech. Enya felt both sides with a strange clarity. One side wanted to protect the families still standing. The other wanted the record kept so the missing would exist in the light again. Enya's decision did not come from a loud conviction. It crept out of a small, stubborn set of actions. She wrapped the child's wooden horse in cloth and held it to her chest while people argued at the edge of Marta's yard. She could feel the horse's paint worn thin where a child's palm had rubbed it. The toy had the exact bite mark she had seen in her dream. Enya tightened her grip and listened for the bell that had rung in sleep and in the lane the week before. A mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived when a voice from the crowd shouted, "There's writing beneath the beam that is us." And a man shouted that he recognized a name carved as his wife's maiden name. The group fell still and a new argument started at once, louder and faster than the ones before. Men pointed. Marta stepped forward and held her hands open. "Stop," she said. Her voice did not order them. It rested between them. A small gust lifted the hem of her scarf. Enya's breath hitched. This was a moment that could break the village into blame or fold it into a careful remembering. The confrontation that followed had quick exchanges. "You want to tell everyone those names?" Thomas demanded. "Thomas, you knew those people. Marta, you had supper with them. That does not change what we must do." Thomas answered, "Call the names, and we will bear it." Marta inhaled and let the breath go. "We will not call them like a charge. We will call them like a number. We will say we found these marks. The rest we decide quietly." Luka looked at Enya, waiting for her to speak. Enya spoke with the same low measure she used in the lane. "I will not shout names in the square," she said, "but I cannot make the board disappear. I will keep the child's toy. I will make a small way to remember at home." Her voice was even. "Enya, Marta, if you keep it, will you promise to tell only when asked? Enya nodded. She could sense a path form under her feet, not a complete solution, but a cautious one. They closed the doorway as a group at dusk. Hands worked with a steady motion. They replaced the plank and tamped earth back into the furrow. People covered the work with straw so the place would not look recent. Marta placed a tuft of cloth on the soil and asked that the cloth be left for those who might come searching later. The work looked like repair rather than erasure. That night in Marta's kitchen, they talked in the low way of people who stitch short sentences, questions, names. Marta hummed the old melody and then broke it for a line of speech. We know enough to make a choice now. Do we make it public or private? She asked. Thomas slammed his palm down on the table. If those names are ours and some of my kin were part of it. I will not have my family blamed for what we did not choose, Marta answered with a single, deliberate sentence. We choose how to hold them. We will not let anger rule us tonight. We will let care rule us instead. She rubbed the rosary with a thumb, keeping time. Enya sat at the table with the child's horse wrapped in cloth in her lap. She lifted the edge of the fabric and touched the horse's worn ear. Her hands felt the small shape as if mapping it. She thought of the bell that had woken them, a sound that left a particular metal taste in her mouth when she remembered it. She thought of the photograph and the date in Luca's careful hand. She thought of names on beams. Marta rose and took a small tin of needles from her pocket. She pushed one needle across the table without speaking and Enya took it with shallow fingers. Marta pointed to a corner of the photograph and motioned for Enya to pin the cloth that covered the horse to the photograph as a private offering. Enya did so. Enya, Marta, remember that some things we keep close to heal, not to accuse. Enya's jaw tightened. I will not shout names, she said. I will not pretend they were not carved here. Her sentence was a soft steadiness. Before dawn the next day, Enya walked back to the field alone while the village slept. She carried a small wooden peg and the wrapped toy. She knelt where the plank lay and dug with a small hand trowel until the edge of the board showed. She placed the toy at the edge of the plank and hammered the peg into the ground beside it. She tied a scrap of cloth to the peg with 2 careful knots. It was not a monument. It was a private marker she thought might keep a child's remembrance from being swallowed by convenience. She stood and ran her palm over the knot until the cloth was smooth. When she returned, Marta was already sweeping the path before her cottage. Marta's hand paused and she looked up. You came back, she asked. I could not let it be alone overnight. Enya. Marta nodded and went back to her broom. Good, she said. Come in. We will make a list of who must know and who must not. Enya stepped in and felt the kitchen close around them with the ordinary smells of boiled potatoes and tea. A small twist surfaced in the days after. A man who had lived on the edge of the village confessed to Luca privately that he had once helped carry a bundle down to the doorway and then left before morning. He could not remember names, only the way the child's horse thudded against a sack. His admission changed how some villagers looked at one another, not in accusation but in the slow, social arithmetic of who had been where when. Marta listened to him and then folded her hands and asked 2 quiet questions. Did you see faces? Did you hear names? He shook his head. No, he said, not then. Not in the dark. The confession didn't solve the ledger on the beam, but it made clear that the memory lay inside living bodies, not only on wood. Arguments surfaced and then quieted in rotation across weeks. Some insisted the timber should be dragged to the green and held in sunlight, others that would open wounds. Enya proposed a middle path she had not planned until the decision had to be made. A small, private evening once a month where a handful of elders would come to Marta's kitchen, look at the list, and read it aloud without naming where each person came from. They would say the names and then put a small stitch of cloth on a bulletin Marta kept folded in her cupboard. It was Marta who seconded the idea and who shaped its rules. We will not call them to the square, she said. We will not make a spectacle. We will not brand anyone for their kin. We will remember by careful handing, not by public shaming. She put the rosary back into her pocket and folded the list into tissue. The villagers argued, then tested the plan for a month. People who came to the kitchen found they could say the names and feel no immediate charge to act. The act of saying the names in private was different from shouting them in a market. It made memory procedural, like mending a garment. At the month mark, an old woman from 2 rows down arrived with her hands wrapped in wool. She set a small loaf of bread on the table and then sat with her mouth closed. Marta placed the beam's photograph in front of her and said, "We found these marks. We will hold them here with cloth and quiet." The old woman touched the photograph and then touched the loaf as if blessing it. "My brother's name is on that board. He kept the chickens. He whistled at the gate. He did not come home in winter." Her voice was soft and only partly accusation. Luca caught Enia's eye and gave a small nod. Their nods were both a recognition and an agreement to hold. Weeks passed and small adjustments followed. Enia stitched a tiny cloth pocket inside her own shawl to hold the toy. When children trailed her on errands, she would let them hold the horse for a few steps and then return it to the pocket. She taught them a small verse to hum when they passed the field so they would not forget to notice. Marta taught a handful of women how to make the knots the way she had tied them on the peg. The village learned a new set of slow gestures. The final decisive moment came unexpectedly. A council of villagers met on a rainy afternoon under Marta's eaves. The rain made a continuous, quiet sound that helped people speak in short, careful bursts. Thomas stood and said, "I want the names removed." "I cannot sleep otherwise," Luca answered in the quick, clipped voice he used when reading to children. "If you remove the names, we erase who stood there." "That is different from forgiving." Thomas's face tightened. Forgiving does not make us innocent." "Removing names will protect my family." Marta's thumb moved on the rosary. She closed her eyes for one slow breath and then opened them. "Thomas, Marta, look at me." He did. "You want to protect your family." "I want to protect all the families. Do you think hiding this will fix the past?" Thomas stared at the boards of the eaves. He did not answer. Enia stood then and spoke without loudness but with an unmistakable steadiness. "If we erase the marks, we make no space for being held accountable," she said. "If we keep them as a private list, we can ask people who were there to speak in small rooms, one by one. We can learn what actually happened. That will hurt, Thomas, but it will also be what the names deserve." Her words were precise. Thomas's jaw unclenched as if a small tension left him. He one sentence. "Then we do it quietly." Marta exhaled through her nose and nodded. The decision landed not as a final answer, but as a course chosen by many hands. They agreed on the narrow process. A private telling, names read in Marta's kitchen, and a sealed record kept under lock where only the elders could consult it for questions of truth. The public face of the village would not be a list of carved names on the green. The private ledger would exist for those who needed to know. When they covered the doorway again that night, Enia placed the child's wooden horse inside her shawl pocket and felt the toy press against her side. Marta set a small knot of cloth on top of the tamped earth and the men drew the plank back over with slow, reverent movements. The field looked ordinary under lamplight, the furrow blending into neighboring lines. People went home with steps that were not lighter, but different in the way a person carries a load shifted from shoulder to back. In the final hours before sleep, Enia sat at her kitchen table and wrapped the photograph in cloth. She tied it with the same double knot she had used on the peg. Marta hummed a line and poured tea into a chipped cup we chose to hold carefully. "Marta, not to punish, not to pretend nothing happened." Enia lifted her chin. "I will tell when asked," she said. "I will not shout names in the square. I will give the room for people to tell the truth to those who ask for it." Marta's hand found Enia's and squeezed once. The chapter closed on a simple action. Enia stepped to the door with the child's toy still in her pocket and pushed the latch closed on Marta's gate. The latch clicked into place. Outside, someone walked past with a basket of potatoes. Somewhere in the lane a bell gave a single soft toll that was not urgent. Enia tightened the knot on the cloth in her pocket and turned the brass ring on her hand until it lay flat against her skin. The village had not returned to how it was. The names remained under a plank and in a folded tissue in Marta's cupboard. But a plan had been made. To speak in small rooms, to keep the child's horse safe, and to bear an uncomfortable knowledge with measured choices. Enia exhaled and let the breath go into the night. The latch clicked again behind her as the door closed.